On 19 February 1944, southwest of Ireland, HMS Starling and HMS Woodpecker pressed down on U-264 until a hidden submarine lost the one gift that had kept it alive: invisibility. The sea was gray, the contact was deep, and Captain Frederick John Walker was asking surface ships to do what surface ships were not supposed to do: hunt patiently, almost silently, and strike only at the last moment. What followed would help complete a patrol later remembered as a record for U-boat sinkings in a single run. The Atlantic did not turn on luck. It turned on method. The ocean belonged to them. Before triumph came dread, and in the Atlantic, dread had numbers. In March 1943, U-boats sank 567,000 tons of Allied shipping. In one 10-day span that same month, they sent 40 merchant ships to the bottom. Those were not abstract losses on a staff chart. They were convoys slowed by weather, escorts stretched thin, and merchant hulls vanishing into black water faster than they could be replaced at the front line of the ocean war. That was why the enemy seemed unbeatable. The U-boat did not need to rule every mile of sea. It only needed to find the seam where the convoy was weakest, strike there, and disappear before the answer came. It worked in packs. It worked in darkness. It worked in the long central reaches of the Atlantic, where air cover once failed and help felt far away. The hunted often heard danger before they understood its shape. Then they heard the explosions. Then, sometimes, nothing at all. The terror was not only what the U-boats destroyed, it was the feeling they imposed on everyone who crossed that ocean. They made distance itself feel hostile. They made the ordinary business of moving men, food, fuel, and weapons into an ordeal of waiting for impact. They made the convoy system, one of the great protective machines of the war, look suddenly fragile. For a time, they gave the impression that the Atlantic was theirs by right. He did not yet know the Atlantic had started to turn. But wars at sea are rarely won by fear alone. They are won when someone learns how to make fear measurable, trackable, and then survivable. That shift began before many men aboard those convoys could feel it. It began with ships, aircraft, radio bearings, radar screens, and a stubborn belief that the U-boat could be hunted instead of merely endured. The man who refused the terms. Into that changing war stepped Captain Frederick John Walker, already known as an anti-submarine specialist, and already thinking beyond the old routine of escort duty. He understood the convoy's problem plainly enough. If escorts only reacted, they stayed half a move behind. If they merely drove the attacker off, then the attacker would return. To survive, the Allies needed more than defense. They needed pursuit. That idea sounds obvious after the fact. It did not feel obvious while the Atlantic was still swallowing ships. Surface escorts had been built, trained, and mentally organized around protection first. Walker wanted something sharper. He wanted support groups not tied to one convoy, groups that could move toward the fight and stay there, groups that could hunt the submarine itself. It was a hard adjustment in doctrine, which is only another way of saying it was a hard adjustment in habit. He was the right man to press it, because he thought tactically and practically at the same time. He did not chase novelty for its own sake. He looked at a U-boat problem and asked what sequence of moves would deny it its favorite escape. That was the beginning of his value. He was not trying to perform brilliance. He was trying to remove options. Under his command, the second support group formed in 1943 and went out not simply to shield convoys, but to help kill the thing stalking them. That change mattered. A convoy under threat no longer had to rely only on the ships immediately around it. Reinforcement could come. Pressure could be sustained. The ocean could push back. But a doctrine on paper is not victory at sea. A hunter still needs eyes, ears, reach, and timing. And in the Atlantic, timing had been the U-boat's greatest ally. Learning to see in the dark, the wider Allied answer gathered piece by piece, and each piece stripped away one layer of the submarine's old advantage. High-frequency direction finding, HF/DF, let ships and aircraft detect a boat by its own radio transmissions. Airborne radar made the night less protective than it had been. Escort carriers extended air cover farther into the Atlantic and narrowed the space in which a U-boat could surface and still hope to remain unseen. Longer-range aircraft pushed danger outward. Support groups waited to reinforce the weak point. None of this ended the struggle by itself. That is important. There was no single lever that turned the Atlantic from loss to control. There was an accumulation of pressure. The U-boat had once depended on darkness, distance, and surprise. Now darkness was thinner, distance was shorter, and surprise grew less reliable. Each improvement was modest when viewed alone. Together, they became a climate the submarine could no longer trust. Remember that detail? Here is where it matters. The ocean had frightened the convoy because it seemed too vast to police. The Allied answer was not to make the ocean small, it was to make it legible. A radio bearing here, a radar contact there, an aircraft overhead where none had been before, a support group close enough to matter. The sea stayed large. It just stopped being empty. By May 1943, the larger balance had already begun to swing. The old exchange no longer favored the hunter beneath the waves. The U-boat remained dangerous. It was no longer comfortably dominant. The U-boat was still underwater. Its advantage was not. But deep-diving boats could still survive a careless counterattack. Detection was not enough. Contact was not enough. To turn information into destruction, Walker needed a method that punished the submarine precisely where it still believed itself safest. The method. Walker's answer was the creeping attack, and its logic was simple enough to explain, even if its execution demanded discipline. One ship kept ASDIC contact from about 1,500 yards away. ASDIC was sonar, the hard ping that told a ship where something hidden lay below. A second ship then moved in quietly, guided toward the target without announcing itself with its own active search. It would pass over the submarine and release depth charges at the last moment. The elegance of the tactic lay in what it denied the U-boat. A submarine under normal attack could sometimes hear the searching ship, judge the approach, and attempt a final evasive move. Walker wanted to steal that instant. He wanted the first unmistakable warning to come too late. He wanted the attacking ship almost on top of the target before the depth charges entered the water. Not dramatic, effective. The point of the tactic was confinement. Every sensible move the submarine made should worsen its position. A boat deeper than 600 feet could no longer trust depth alone. The attack reached down after it. That was Walker's gift. He understood anti-submarine war as the management of another captain's choices. He could not see through steel and water by intuition alone. No one could. But once contact had been gained, he aimed to make the enemy's next decision costly, then the next one fatal. You do not fight it the way it wants to be fought. You make it fight on your terms. He did not yet know any of that in the abstract. Mattered only if the method survived the ocean itself. Salt water, fatigue, and fear were ruthless editors. A tactic could look beautiful in briefing notes and fail under pressure. Soon enough, Walker would have his proof. Hit subscribe right now, because what happens next is the patrol that turns method into a record. Do not go anywhere. The patrol that went out to hunt. On 29 January 1944, Walker sailed with HMS Starling, HMS Kite, HMS Magpie, HMS Wild Goose, and HMS Woodpecker. Even the composition of the group carried a message. This was not a scattered collection of ships hoping to stumble into success. It was a formed instrument, built to search, maintain contact, and strike repeatedly. In Atlantic War, repeated pressure was everything. The patrol began with a result that mattered beyond the single kill. On 31 January, U-592 was destroyed. That first success did more than improve the tally. It validated the patrol's purpose. A support group that hunted aggressively had gone out and found what it was supposed to find. It had not merely waited for danger to brush against a convoy screen. It had moved toward danger and turned contact into destruction. That distinction marked the shift at the center of this story. A convoy escort protects, a hunter presses. Walker's group did both when needed, but its identity on this patrol was unmistakable. It was there to seek out the U-boat and deny it rest. Success at sea can be deceptive, however. One sinking may show skill. It may also flatter fortune. A single submarine lost in heavy weather tells you little if the wider enemy remains intact, coordinated, and capable of returning the next night. Walker needed more than an opening blow. He needed continuity. He needed to prove that the first destruction was not an exception, but the beginning of a pattern. Remember that detail? Here is where it matters. Back in March 1943, the U-boat had imposed tempo. Convoys reacted. Escorts scrambled. Merchant crews endured. Now a support group was trying to reverse the rhythm. The U-boat would react. The U-boat would evade. The U-boat would spend its strength merely surviving. That is how an apparently invincible enemy starts to look mortal. But nothing in war is granted because the logic seems sound. Pressure must be kept up. Contact must be held. Crews must work through fatigue, wet decks, and the burden of knowing that one mistake can let a submarine slide back into the dark. The patrol still had to become something larger than a promising start. 3 boats in 15 hours. It did. In the space of 15 hours on 8 and 9 February 1944, Walker's escort group sank 3 U-boats, U-762 on 8 February, then U-734 and U-238 on 9 February. That sequence changed the patrol from successful to extraordinary. Consider what that meant from the enemy's side of the contact. Submarines built to exploit openings in the convoy routes were now being found, fixed, and destroyed in rapid succession by surface ships that refused to lose the trail. A U-boat captain could still dive. He could still maneuver. He could still hope. Yet with each renewed contact, hope had less sea room in which to operate. This is where Walker's system thinking showed its full force. Detection by itself did not sink boats. Aggression without coordination did not sink boats. Endurance without method did not sink boats. What sank boats was the fusion of all three, sustained over hours, then over days. A contact was not an event. It was the opening phase of an argument. Walker's ships intended to finish the argument. The numbers now carried drama of their own. 1 sinking on 31 January. Then 3 more in 15 hours on 8 and 9 February. The tally climbed, and with it rose something the convoy war had often denied Allied sailors: confidence. Not ease. Never ease. Confidence. The feeling that if contact could be gained and kept, the submarine beneath the water might not escape at all. The U-boat was still underwater. Its advantage was not. But a patrol becomes legend only when it survives its own success. The enemy still had time to strike back, time to disappear, time to remind everyone that the Atlantic remained a hard and lethal place. Walker's group had proven pace. It now needed endurance. The 5th kill and the gathering payoff. On 11 February, Walker's escort group sank U-424. 8 days later, on 19 February, it sank U-264. Those 2 dates completed the shape of the patrol. What had started on 29 January as a determined hunt now stood revealed as something larger, a sustained demonstration that the Allied anti-submarine system could find, attack, and finish multiple U-boats in one run at sea. The 5th kill matters because it prevented the earlier burst from being dismissed as a brief concentration of luck. 3 U-boats in 15 hours was remarkable. A 5th boat later in the same patrol suggested structure. It suggested that the result did not depend on one extraordinary night alone. Walker's group could strike, recover, search again, and strike once more. That is what makes a method real in war. It repeats. By now, the open loop planted at the beginning of this story was almost ready to close. The patrol was moving toward a record for U-boat sinkings in one patrol, a record later equaled only by USS England in May 1944. But the record itself was not the heart of the matter. Records are neat. War is not. The heart of the matter was that the Atlantic battle had reached a point where surface hunters could impose a chain of consequences on submarines across weeks instead of moments. You can feel the moral reversal in that. For so long, the convoy had carried the burden of anticipation. Men waited for the U-boat to choose its place and hour. Now, a U-boat commander had reason to fear not only discovery, but continuation. Contact would not necessarily end when the first attack failed. It might sharpen. It might return. It might grow worse with every mile. But even that larger truth required one last dramatic image, one final scene in which all the abstract language of doctrine and systems was forced down into the stubborn particulars of men, ships, sea, and depth. U-264. That scene came on 19 February 1944. U-264 attacked while Walker was supporting convoy ON-224. Starling and Woodpecker answered. Somewhere below them, the submarine still possessed what had once been its decisive protection. Steel hull, depth, concealment. The long-trained belief that the sea itself would help it break contact if it could endure long enough. Walker's way of fighting denied comfort to that belief. Contact had to be kept. Pressure had to be patient. An anti-submarine action could not become impatient simply because the target remained unseen. That was one of the hardest lessons in this war. Surface crews lived in weather and exposure. The submarine hid beneath them, out of sight, forcing them to trust instruments, bearings, procedure, and one another. It demanded composure, not drama. And then, the hidden boat lost the condition it needed most. Starling and Woodpecker forced U-264 to the surface, and it was scuttled. With that, the patrol reached its sixth kill. The record promised earlier was paid off at last. 6 U-boats destroyed in a single patrol, later equaled only by USS England in May 1944. The force of that moment lay not only in the number, though the number was enough to secure remembrance. It lay in the surfacing itself. A submarine lives by choosing when to be seen. To force it upward is to strip away its preferred world and make it answer on yours. The unseen enemy, whose menace had once seemed woven into the Atlantic itself, was dragged into daylight and finished. Remember that detail? Here is where it matters. At the opening of this script, U-264 lost invisibility. That was more than a scene. It was the story's governing fact. Allied victory in the Atlantic did not begin because the sea grew gentler. It began because the U-boat's invisibility grew unreliable. He did not yet know the Atlantic had started to turn. By 19 February 1944, he knew. But triumph in war means little if it cannot outlast the patrol that achieved it. The question after any success is always the same. Did this change the wider fight, or did it merely decorate one brilliant run? What the patrol meant. It changed the wider fight because it proved, in concentrated form, how the enemy's edge collapsed. The old dread had rested on a set of assumptions. The U-boat would find first. The U-boat would choose the moment. The U-boat would use distance and darkness to withdraw. The convoy would absorb punishment and be grateful merely to survive. Walker's patrol showed those assumptions failing one after another. HF/DF made radio transmission dangerous. Radar made darkness porous. Escort carriers and longer-range aircraft narrowed the old spaces of immunity. Support groups allowed reinforcement and sustained pursuit. Walker's creeping attack turned contact into a disciplined trap. No single part of that system deserves all the credit. That is precisely the point. The Atlantic was not recovered by one miracle weapon or one inspired afternoon. It was recovered by a chain of improvements that made the U-boat's every strength less dependable than it had been. That is why the resolution must return to the feeling of dread from the beginning. In March 1943, the convoy sailed through an ocean that seemed owned by the enemy. By February 1944, that same ocean felt watched in a different way. A U-boat could still hide. It could not count on hiding for long. It could still attack. It could not count on escaping the answer. The patrol also clarified something enduring about command. Walker's achievement was not a matter of personal myth detached from organization. He mattered because he could translate a larger Allied advantage into action at sea. He took better information, better support, and better tools, and he gave them form. He turned them into a hunt. That is a different kind of greatness from battlefield flamboyance. It is quieter. It lasts longer. It looked like another escort patrol. It was not. What sailed out on 29 January 1944 was the accumulated intelligence of a hard campaign finally learning how to express itself with confidence. What returned was proof. Proof that the U-boat menace, though still dangerous, no longer held the initiative it once had. Proof that the Atlantic could be made survivable not by wishful courage, but by organized skill. The long-term legacy of Walker's patrol was larger than its record, though the record remains the cleanest way to grasp its scale. 6 U-boats destroyed in one patrol is memorable. More important is what that number represented. It represented the maturing of anti-submarine war into a systems fight in which sensors, doctrine, teamwork, endurance, and timing worked together. Walker did not win because he hit harder in a single dramatic instant. He won because he hunted smarter over time. That is the answer to the title's central question. The real trick was not a mythic stroke. It was the patient, disciplined method that made the impossible look possible and turned the Atlantic against the submarine that had once terrorized it. The Atlantic did not become safer when the Allies hit harder. It became safer when they hunted smarter. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we tell you how America actually won its war. If you valued this story, give it a like, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and we'll see you in the next one.